The Ministry of Finance and the Public Service presents Let's Talk Finance, a feature exploring the various elements of the economic program.
Welcome again to another episode of Let's Talk Finance here on Nationwide 90 FM. My name is George Davis. My guest this week, as she was last week, Hazel Edwards, Senior Director of Legal Affairs at the Jamaica Customs Agency. Welcome again, Hazel.
Thank you, George. It is good to be back.
Excellent. All right. So we're talking about the repeal of the Customs Act and the replacement of same with new legislation. We spoke last week looking at we spoke briefly about dispute resolution. We spoke about the overarching need to replace the legislation and the crucial requirement to make it modern, to make it compliant with the 21st century standards, and of course, to make it more wieldy for the customs agency itself and the publics that it serves. Let's talk about predictability now, the predictability element that will be not introduced, but which will be enhanced by the existence of this new legislation.
Indeed, George. Predictability is key. It's important to business people who are a main part of our stakeholders. It's also important to the agency as well. And one of the ways that we intend to introduce and increase predictability is to introduce this idea of advance rulings. Mm-hmm. Now, the idea behind advance rulings is that a person who intends to import goods may approach the Commissioner of Customs by way of an application long before he has imported these goods. And he would indicate to the commissioner, these are the items I intend to import, give the detail, the description of the items, where the items will be coming from, and request a ruling or a decision from the commissioner as to how those goods will be treated when they are actually imported. Mm-hmm. So the commissioner may give a determination as to how the item will be classified for tariff purposes, how it will be treated in respect of the rules of origin. And what that means simply is that depending on where goods are coming from, yes, they may be liable to duties or they may not be liable to duties. As we know, for example, we're part of CARICOM. Yes. Goods that are originating from within CARICOM may enjoy different duty treatment. Or any other matters in respect of which we've introduced advance rulings. This ruling will be binding on the Commissioner of Customs for a set period of time. And what is now being contemplated is a period of 3 years. Yes. And so what this means essentially, George, is that the importer can have that ruling in hand. Mm-hmm. And once he imports those goods, sticking within the terms that he has set out, within that have been laid out in that advance ruling, then the goods will be afforded that treatment. And what this really offers is a remarkable level of predictability to our stakeholders. They can plan now well in advance and say, all right, next year I'm going to be bringing in these items, knowing how the items will be classified for tariff purposes, knowing the origin treatment. I can make a reasonable assessment as to what my duty and tax liability will be. Planning. Yes. And that allows us to really grow our economy. Yeah. An important question from the first episode, which is it's needful for me to ask it now. Given that the actors at customs know the legislation will be changed, the individuals representing your various publics know that the legislative change is coming. Isn't there a risk that the application of the legislation as it is now, the more popular sections as it deals with everyday business, that there's a danger that some of those could be relaxed because, in a few months' time, this will not be on the books anymore, and, we can just push this through now in this way because, in short order, the new rule will be this, and when the new rule comes, we can start fresh from there? Not at all. Customs deals with the law. Right? And if you engage with any customs officer, you'll always find that they're citing the law. Mm. So the law is being applied as it is now. Yes. And when the new rules come into effect, then the new rules will begin to apply. But what it is that we recognize that the thinking of Jamaica Customs has been changing, just as the thinking of our stakeholders has been changing. And we're looking to see how we can interpret even the rules that we have now in a manner that facilitates trade and that best enhances our objectives of border protection and revenue collection. So we are approaching things in a very modern, robust sort of way, but we are applying the law as it is now. And we encourage our stakeholders to ensure that they comply with the law as it is now. And remember, George, we're not getting rid of everything. There are many good things in the current law.
Yes.
And that which works, we intend to keep.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, because as a blanket statement, you get the impression Jamaicans think that you're repealing and replacing a law means you're throwing everything of the old legislation out and making everything new in the new law. Not so, of course. That would be impractical.
It would be impractical. It would not be in the best interest of anyone, because we recognize that business is continuing. And there are many things that we are doing well. So we want to keep the things that we're doing well and move forward. It's not about starting from scratch. It's about building on the solid foundation that we have now, so that we're constantly moving forward.
Which jurisdictions, if any, have you taken legal or legislative cues from? Because I asked in the first episode last week about the contribution of your stakeholders, your various publics, to the legislative changes. That couldn't be enough, because it is that you would have looked at other countries to see how they align their customs laws and regulations with the demands of that particular entity in that particular country. So those legislative cues that you've looked outside of Jamaica and received, where have you looked and, I don't want to say copied, but, followed?
Well, what I will say in relation to that, George, is that we have been looking at other countries that have done certain things well, right? For example, if you see a particular jurisdiction that has a very strong logistics-centered economy, and they have certain key provisions in their laws,
Yes.
then we certainly want to look at it, examine it closely. We may want to adopt some of it, but we always have to have an eye to our own local circumstances and what will work best for us. So it's never a situation where we're looking at any one country and saying, okay, we're going to take everything from this particular country. Another country may do appeals really, really well. And so we want to look at their dispute resolution mechanisms and see what aspects of it we can take. We recognize that there are a number of good examples globally for different things.
Yes.
And we recognize that when it comes to making this kind of major change, it's important that we're not very insular. It's important that we're not just looking inwards. And so one of the things that Jamaica Customs has done is that we have engaged a number of international partners throughout this process. We have been talking to partners at the World Bank. We have been talking to partners at the CARTOC, the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Unit Center, that is a part of the International Monetary Fund.
Yes.
And we've just been talking to our stakeholders who themselves have quite a bit of international experience. They're trading with their partners from Singapore. They're trading with persons from China. They're trading with persons from the US and from the European Union. So they too are bringing their own experiences on the ground to bear to the process. So it really has been about looking globally, looking at what is the international best practice, and that is laid out in many international instruments, such as, for example, the revised Kyoto Convention, the SAFE framework of standards, as well as the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and Jamaica became a party to the Trade Facilitation Agreement in January of 2016. So we've been looking at these international instruments. They've said these international instruments set out recommendations for countries and sets out principles and standards that, once adopted, will allow Jamaica to have a modern customs agency. So we've been using those international instruments, as I said, talking to our global partners, talking very, very closely with our stakeholders who are on the ground, who are having the experience, who are working with the legislation day to day. And if not with the law itself, they're working with the effects of it. Yes. Right? And crafting something that really is consistent with the GOJ agenda and, to our Vision 2030.
Speaking of Vision 2030, when I've had perhaps 3 conversations in the previous season of Let's Talk Finance with colleagues of yours from the Customs Agency about Azikuda World. And reading, and there's a lot of literature, well, you would know that there's a lot of literature on Azikuda World. And there was a time when persons who did business with customs complain about certain aspects because, with everything that is new, there are always teething problems and so forth. But to myself, I said, well, for this radical direction that customs wants to move into, I struggle to see how the existing legislative framework can support this move to a 21st century system to take customs leaps and bounds beyond where it is now. I say all of that to ask, how does the implementation of Azikuda World intersect, I hope it doesn't clash, with the legislative changes that are to be made to how customs works?
In fact, it's an excellent question, George. And what I would say is that it is harmonious. In 2014, amendments were done to the Customs Act to facilitate the implementation of Azikuda World, because, of course, it meant moving away from a largely paper-based system to this one single electronic system. So those amendments were done in 2014, and they will continue to form a part of the law. In fact, the move towards utilizing electronic systems is key. One, because we need to grow on this Azikuda World system, which is increasing efficiencies, brought real benefits to our stakeholders in terms of just the savings that they have gained from moving away from a paper-based system. It also means, too, that the Azikuda World system is capable of integrating with other systems, such as, for example, the port community system. And recently, there has been the launch of this single window. And what this means is that when our stakeholders are engaging with Jamaica Customs or they're engaging with other border regulatory agencies, they can potentially have one electronic portal, certainly with a single window, through which they can make one submission. And through that one portal, interact with all the various agencies. Now, this is a significant and huge step in moving towards a modern customs agency.
Yes.
For many stakeholders, if you are, for example, importing certain commodities, not only do you have to engage with customs, but you have to be going to these different individual agencies to, find out what the rules are, make different submissions, get different permits, and so on. That's a lot of time, and time is money.
Yeah, all the time.
Always. So if you're now able to utilize this one system to make all these submissions, then, of course, things can go much more quickly. It also means, too, that certainly between Azikuda World and, let's say, for example, the port community system, it means that persons can have information at their fingertips. And we cannot underestimate the value of that. Sometimes a person may have their items at customs and they may be wondering, are my items ready?
Yes.
Right? Doesn't mean I have to go to the ports and I have to sit there for a whole day to wait. Maybe somebody told me that my shipment will be ready for collection at 4 p.m.
Yes.
Then I can turn up at 10 minutes to 4.
Yes.
Now, with an electronic system, it means that as goods are going through the various processes and certainly on the part of customs, once we have released the goods, then that release notification can be sent out to the importer or to anybody else whom he wishes that information to go to the other players in the chain, so that we can work much more efficiently, we can spend our time much more efficiently, and that means real savings. It means that we can do business better.
Yeah. Finally, we're out of time, but just to say that you are confident that this legislation, as you promised last week, you gave the commitment that, look, it will be mutually beneficial for the various publics, the customs agency implementing, and of course, the persons doing business with customs. You are saying that you expect that this legislation will pass through the various houses in short order, and that there'll be no hold up there, so that you can implement and keep the transition and the improvements going apace?
We're looking forward to the legislation moving ahead. In terms of how quickly it will go through the House, that will be dependent on a number of factors. But right now, what we're focused on is having the conversation with our stakeholders, right? It's important that the legislation meets their needs. And so we want them to continue to engage with us when we set up the meetings, when we invite them to talk to us, when we hit the streets.
Yes.
We want all stakeholders.
And that's why I asked the question, because many times legislation is prepared, and it is when it goes to the parliament that you hear, send it back to so-and-so committee because so-and-so stakeholder has a red flag to wave. And you say, but wait, where were you in the consultation process? There was no consultation process. That is why I asked the question.
That is key. It is something that the minister has mandated. It is something that the commissioner is very committed to. We want to hear from everyone, from the person who may have issues with clearing a barrel to our major importers.
Yes.
We want to hear from everyone in the process so that we can craft a legislation that meets their needs and, as I said, keeps us on the path towards economic growth.
Well played. Hazel Edwards, Senior Director, Legal Affairs, Jamaica Customs Agency. Thank you very much. That's it. Let's Talk Finance.
That was Let's Talk Finance, brought to you by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service.